Hi Facebookers, this is Steve Barrett, Editor-in-Chief of PRWeek. We're about to get going with our weekly podcast and good to be back with you. We got Jeff Cartwright with us, who's Head of Content at Morning Consult. Jeff, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, and we're going to find out about Morning Consult and your role there and how you're playing in and how you work with agencies and brands. So looking forward to that. We got Frank Washkuch here as our News Director. Frank, our regular incumbent. Having a good week, Frank?
Very busy as always, yeah.
It has been, hasn't it?
It
Started
has.
with the old Trump and Putin stuff, which, bit of an unprecedented day in news. So we will definitely pick up on that and other stuff as we get going. But we're about to, if you've got any comments or questions, please append them on Facebook. Try and be nice. Don't have to be horrible on social media. It's not compulsory. You can actually be productive and conversational, if you like. So yeah, let's go. We good, Perry? Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PRWeek's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the worlds of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the editor-in-chief of PRWeek, VP, editorial director,
whatever it is this
chief
week.
Team maker, cheerleader. Annoyer of Frank and the rest of the editorial team. We got Frank Washkuch here. He's our news director. How are you doing, Frank?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on, Steve.
Always a pleasure. Wouldn't be the same without you. And we've got a great guest this week. We've got Jeff Cartwright, who's Head of Content at Morning Consult. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. We'll chat with Jeff in a second, and then we're going to get into our topical issues this week. We'll do a World Cup wash-up. We chatted about this last week, but there was an interesting final. Interesting pitch invasion, interesting stuff going on. And then on Monday, of course, President Putin went straight to the summit in Finland. Nothing to see there, was there?
Quietly.
So we'll talk about those issues. I've still got my cough, by the way, you'll be pleased to know. Got that in Russia and it's still hanging around. In fact, I'm going to cough now. There you go, bonus. We'll talk about Papa John's. Few developments on that story. Some of the agencies have resigned. We'll see what that means for the company and the ethics, and the whole episode has brought up a few interesting issues. Morning Consult has done an interesting survey on millennials and brands. Frank's favourite subject.
Love millennials.
Well, you are one.
Yeah.
You are.
Not really. I don't.
No, you are.
It depends on the definition.
Well, we'll get into that.
It depends where the age cutoff happens.
Jeff will tell us whether you're a millennial or not. And
the
then
big
we'll
reveal.
Finish. We'll finish.
It's like a season finale. The big reveal coming up.
Is Frank a millennial or not? And then we'll get into Q2 holding company numbers. A couple of them have reported this week. And that should be a wrap. But Jeff, Morning Consult, give us the sort of potted brand story and maybe a little bit about how it came about. Interesting company doing research or polling in a different way, I think.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me here. You kind of hit it on the head right there. So Morning Consult, we started in 2013. And what we did is we saw the survey research space, particularly at that point, the 2012 election had just happened. There had been a lot of talk about polling, especially on the political side. But actually where we were looking when we came into it is we wanted to find ways to kind of advance the survey research industry. Telephone polling was dying. People aren't answering their phones as much anymore. That makes it more expensive.
Does anyone have a landline anymore?
I mean, I don't. So it's made it more expensive. It's made it harder to get a representative sample. And so our CEO, Michael Ramlett, when he was looking at the space, what he really saw was this advent of online polling that had come on in the early 2000s and had really started to pick up speed 2012. And so where he specifically saw that going was, how do you use online survey research to tell the story of what consumers are actually thinking, right? So I think, especially in the media and marketing and PR spaces, right, there's a lot of tools out there, social media metrics, news, media monitoring tools that are proliferating constantly, but to us, that's not what actually people are thinking. That is a biased sample. It's not a nationally representative sample. The people who are on Twitter are going to be elites who are outraged about something.
Usually,
right? They don't think the platform would exist without it, right? And so what we saw when we were looking at this field is brands and companies are using that as a proxy to understand what consumers think, whether how to react to a crisis or how to build, brand recognition or a campaign around a certain launch. For us, we're like, no, that's not a good way to make business decisions. So what we did is we invested in online polling, and we've built out this technology that allows us to survey between 5,000 and 10,000 Americans every single day. And so we use this data in a couple ways. One of it is we survey about 2,000 brands and products. Everything from Papa John's to Pepsi to United, name a brand, we're likely going to have it. So we're surveying every day about their favorability, whether or not people intend to purchase, whether they'd be proud to work for that company, if they make a good impact in that community. And what that allows us to do on that end is...
And you're doing that like every day?
Every single day. And so we like to kind of phrase it as the Bloomberg terminal of public opinion, right? You can log in, you can look at basically the stock ticker for your brand. So let's say a crisis hits your brand one day, you're immediately going to be able to tell what is the impact.
Where do you differ from someone like YouGov in that respect? Because they do a similar sort of panels, don't they?
So YouGov is kind of like Web 1.0 in this space. What YouGov really invested in was building their own panel. So they went out and they recruited a bunch of people to their panel.
Nielsen stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they have about 2.2 million people on their panel, which that might sound like a lot, but in reality, if you're trying to scale this and go every single day and get really deep demographics, 2.2 million is not enough in a year to be able to do it at that level. So what we did is we invested in making a market of panels that we can go to. So instead of having access to about 2.2, we have access to around 40 million Americans. So that's why we can survey 5,000 to 10,000. So that's the big differentiator, but also from that level, it lets you go down to not only what men and women think about a topic, but what mothers in suburban Cleveland think about Pampers, right?
And then would you add on, you can add questions on each day? If, let's say you had a specific issue or a poll or a client to work with, do you add, how does that work?
So, yes, so we have our technology product, brand intelligence, and then we work with a lot of brands and companies on specific survey research. Why we particularly like online survey research for the brand space is you can get really creative, right? So we can do things where we ask, what do you think of X, Y, or Z? Or we can do things where we can show you an advertisement or show you a logo or play you a video or play you some audio clip to really kind of get at how that ad or that moment is impacting you. So we do this a lot with movie trailers. We do this a lot with, the latest 30-second ad spot being dropped by, name big Super Bowl advertiser.
Did you, you mentioned Papa John's, have you managed to get any insight into the way people are thinking about that brand, for example, over what's been going on?
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about this a little bit more. We have really been keeping a close eye on Papa John's, and before I came over here today, I logged into our brand intelligence platform, and we've actually just in the past few days seen a drop in their brand from the perspective of their favorability is down. We see that the intent to purchase is down. And I think why you're seeing Papa John's probably more affected than, say, a brand that doesn't have their CEO at the forefront is because, the founder, Papa John's himself, is on every piece of branding, every commercial, every advertisement. He is the company, right?
Yeah, that's the problem when you
Right.
when you go down that route, isn't it? If something goes wrong with that, we saw that with Subway and their brand spokesperson.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, I wrote a piece after getting some of your research that sometimes the polling and the stats aren't quite what they seem. Do you want to explain a little bit about that and what some of the research has shown?
So when you spoke with our team, I think what we were really talking about is there are social media metrics that people react to and think that's what people are thinking. So I always like to, my favorite example is because this really blew up was, if you remember Pepsi's Kendall Jenner ad last year.
Indeed.
Right?
If you were moments in the history of marketing. Well, you're going to tell us it probably was. And that actually it did better than people think.
I mean, if you were to look to Twitter or news, you would have thought it was the end of the company. Like, everyone walk out, Pepsi's no longer here. When that video aired, what we did was we went directly into the field, we showed the advertisement, we asked all these people all these questions about it, and what we found is there was actually a significant chunk of people who liked it. I think around 25% had a negative reaction to it, so like 25% not liking it means it's not a great ad, right? But to say that there was unanimous total, this ad did not work, well, that narrative, to us, when looking at the actual data, we didn't think that was.
And was that an immediate narrative, or was that one formed a little bit later, but that was digging deeper into the initial reactions, basically?
Right, and what we saw, so we can dial test a video, right, where we ask people to actually, while they're watching the video, tell us at which moments they're liking the video or not liking the video. And what was fascinating was we actually saw, I think there was a lot of conversation at that time of of liberals are going to hate this. This is making fun of the things that they're trying to handle, but liberals actually liked the video way more than Republicans. So I think that narrative didn't bear out in kind of the
And you
national
did the same
conversation.
thing with United Airlines, which we know very well at PRWeek, but the same thing there, that their brand actually, what is it? Is it 2 years now?
It was just last year.
It was last,
Yeah, it was just
feels
last March. Yeah.
Yeah, but 15 months on, they're kind of, the brand has survived. I mean, airlines is a very specific
Yeah.
industry, and we've only got like 4 or 5 players. But again, the initial data wasn't necessarily what it might have initially seemed.
So when we looked at Pepsi, especially like brand tracking, we didn't see a movement in any of their numbers in terms of a negative drop. We didn't see a positive increase either. Like that video did not affect their overall brand. United, though, with the David Dow incident, we saw a dramatic drop in their favorability. And that's the favorability, whether or not you have an unfavorable view of that company. Interestingly, though, when we looked at purchasing intent, like are you less likely to purchase from this company, it didn't move. What was really interesting is their quarterly report from that, their earnings report from that quarter showed that they actually did better that quarter than they had before. So I think it kind of bears out, your brand can take a really big hit, but not necessarily it's going to affect your bottom line. I think part of that is it's the airline industry, and there are a few other options. So if you have status on United Airlines and you take it from Newark to Dulles every week, you're going to continue to do that.
Even if they lock your dog in an overhead
Even if they lock your dog, yep.
Yeah, no, it's interesting stuff.
So you launched in 2012, and I remember right after the election in 2012, it was like the world was Nate Silver's oyster at that point because he called it so accurately. But it's such a different world now in terms of polling than it was 4 years ago, and that polling is one of the industries that came out of the last presidential election looking not so great. We in the media didn't look so great either, but polling, there were a lot of doubts about the accuracy of the polls. Did you respond to that in any way? Did you take a look at things a little bit differently?
Well, so I think that was also kind of something we fought back with because we do a weekly poll with Politico every week, and
Right.
we started that partnership in 2016, and so in 2016 was much of the horse race, and so when it came to our final election result, we had Hillary Clinton, I think, winning by 3 percentage points of the popular vote, and I think she won by 2.3.
Right.
So, and across the board, a lot of polls were like that, right?
Right.
There are a couple outliers.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of polls were very accurate when it came to the popular vote.
And
yeah.
Nate Silver writes a lot about that the polling
Right.
industry kind of got shot at as an excuse to the surprise, but if you actually look at the data, it performed quite well. And especially in the online space, which we exist in, I mean, it was a big moment for all of us, YouGov and Ipsos and all that, showing that like we are here and we're here to stay.
I saw a poll on Axios this morning, which they actually did with SurveyMonkey, but that's a different way of going down it. And it said that basically Trump has got an incredible favorability rating with Republicans. Yeah, I think it was right up there in the 80-90%. So he is still very popular with his core. Whatever he does, he retains that. What are your sort of figures showing about issues like that?
So do you remember when Trump said that he could shoot someone dead on Fifth Avenue and his supporters would stay with him? It's extremely true. Across every big moment, what has been deemed either a failure or a misstep in the Trump presidency, his voters have stuck with him.
Yeah.
They're solid. And on top of that, Trump is very good at communicating with his audience. So today, his tweet about Trump and Putin, or about his meeting with Putin, right? He said, this is going great. It's just the fake news media that is affecting it. And I think that's really important for a few reasons. Trump supporters are not going anywhere. People who do not like Trump are not going anywhere. They're not moving. So what Trump is doing week in and week out is not going to move this much here or there. What's really interesting is to see how he can steer his supporters. So, for example, we can look at the NFL, right? When he finally tuned in on players kneeling. We saw the NFL, and we track the NFL, we saw them go from being a brand that most Americans loved, liked in some kind of way, to being one of the most polarizing brands in the country. Republicans despised them, Democrats liked them, and that happened a minute after that tweet. That wasn't the first time kneeling had come up as an issue, right? But it was the second Trump stepped in and made it an issue, and in 2 weeks we're releasing a bigger report kind of looking at how brands should take political stances. And I was just looking at this before we came over. The number one thing to get Republicans to no longer like your brand is to take a stance on kneeling. which is, I mean, a year ago that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah,
And
and
so
that's going to be a really interesting report because people do expect brands to take a stance on things, but there is a danger in doing that because if you take the wrong stance, or all your supporters are not, all your consumers are not necessarily going to be of one political persuasion or view. So it's a very difficult thing for companies and brands to really decide how to navigate that. So.
Yeah, and I saw an interesting tweet from Matthew Dowd, who was the Republican pollster for a long time, and he said that you have to look a little bit deeper into the Trump numbers about when you get past approval versus disapproval into strongly disapprove.
Exactly.
And
The
then
intent,
strongly
yeah.
disapprove actually tells you more of how the midterms might go than otherwise. Would you agree with that, or is that?
Yeah, so we release a report monthly. We call it the Midterm Wave Watch, kind of going into this election, where do things stand? And across every state, what you'll see is Democrats have a strong, intense disapproval of the president compared to Republicans who only have like a medium approval. So there's a huge intensity gap when looking at it. So I think that, yes, he's right on the mark there, that like that will be a big indicator. People are on the left are going to turn out in protest of Trump. People on the right aren't maybe at this point, it doesn't seem they're as likely to turn out in support of Trump.
Right.
And that kind of needs to happen if the Democrats are going to win, because they tend to come out less than the Republicans, don't they? So that's an interesting thing. Yeah, listen, fascinating stuff. We could chat about this for a long time. But so let's get into the topical subjects, because they're all relevant to this discussion. Frank, the World Cup.
Yeah.
We talked about it a lot last week, but it was
A rainy ending.
it was incredible.
It was a good moment, though, wasn't it?
With Putin with his umbrella and then the other two leaders getting absolutely soaked and not really caring, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we talked about Brand Russia last week and how it had come out well. Interesting pitch invasion. Pussy Riot demonstrators. Very non-violent. I mean, it was... You know, you've got to be careful nowadays because you don't know they could be terrorists, they could have weapons or whatever. So, but it certainly was probably the only real note of discord through the tournament, where people suddenly thought, oh, what are they talking about? And a good communications moved by that group, because next thing they're on Anderson Cooper on Monday night, so their message is getting aired. But I mean, what was your take on it after the tournament had finished, and then obviously Putin headed off to Finland?
Well, I'm happy the French won, obviously.
That was great. I
mean,
Yeah, they have a very likable team.
They do.
Yeah.
Nothing against Croatia. They
They had
great
a good run.
And, yeah, still weeping about them beating England. But anyway, but yeah, do you think the pitch invasion and the whole optics of the closing ceremony changed anything, or did Russia still come out of this, you know, with a feel good?
Well, I think it depends on how you view what happened in the day after, and if you view Putin very negatively and you view Russia and their actions very negatively, I mean, I don't know how much the World Cup changes anything for you.
Yeah, I think for people who visited, and there were millions of visitors that Russia would never normally get, because you normally need a visa, and they were suspended. You just had a fan ID. So there were millions of visitors who saw Russia who hadn't seen it before, and interacted with their people, and vice versa. People, I think we said this last week, visited 3 cities that weren't even open until '91 to foreign visitors. So yeah, but okay, let's lead into.
But it was a good tournament.
It was.
I mean, it was well run.
It was well run.
Yeah.
Great stadiums, lots of fans, great football. It was good fun, and I enjoyed the pitch invasion personally. I thought it was good that we did get at least because let's face it, not everything is great in Russia. There are some pretty bad things that go on there, despite what maybe President Trump says. And it was good to have some of that aired. It was interesting that the torrential downpour and the security around President Putin
And his umbrella, sure.
because they could have got that finished before the rain even started if he hadn't had so much security around him. But then let's lead into the next day. Off he goes to Finland, the very high-profile summit with President Trump. And what was your take on that in terms of the optics of the, if you like, brand USA and brand Russia?
Right, yeah, so they're still walking this back 3 days later. If you hear my phone buzzing, it's that I'm getting alerts, and that at the press briefing today, they finally clarified that they're not going to allow Russian interrogators to talk to a former U.S. ambassador to Russia,
Probably
which would seem like a given. But took them a few days to
You
figure that
said
out.
the word press briefing there. That's
But-
only the third one in the last month, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. That's a whole
Topic,
different
yeah.
subject. Thing I would say about it too is I think this is going to become the sort of story where things about that meeting are going to trickle out over the next couple of weeks, because the reality is that while the Russian government is saying agreements were made and
In the private meeting.
Right, I think the American media doesn't really know what was said yet, and a
Not
lot
sure
of these things are going
the-
to
not
come
sure
out.
the Trump
So
administration knows what.
yeah, so this story is going to keep going for a while. That meeting and that press conference are going to be very consequential.
Something that we've noticed in our polling, speaking of brand USA, brand Russia, is that in the lead up to NATO, in the lead up to the summit, we ask kind of once or twice a month, is Russia an ally, an enemy, or a friend, but not an ally? And we've actually really started to see Russia improve, especially among Republicans, and what they think about Russia. And while it's not an ally status yet, it's definitely, they're really softening on the enemy.
Frenemy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Frenemy.
so I have two thoughts about this, and then you
Frank's
can
gonna
tell
be-
me why I'm wrong. But my one thought about this is I think if you think about it like as a history buff, every presidency has these kind of made for TV moments that you think of when you think about a certain term in office, whether it's like, George Bush with the megaphone or something like that. But I wonder if that press conference is actually going to turn into Trump's kind of moment, in that it's something people remember and it shapes their opinion of him going forward.
I mean, my pushback for you on that is, has any presidency been like the Trump presidency?
No, that's a good point, and which the day's events overwhelm you.
And I think
hour
there's-
after hour, yeah.
Week after week, you go,
Yeah.
this is going to be the defining moment. I mean, even Charlottesville, it wasn't that long ago, but how
Right.
many people can still recall that as being, people talked about that was going to be a center point of how people
Yeah,
thought
well,
about
that's going to come back in the news because the right is having a march to mark, believe it or not.
Yeah. So, and the other thing
anniversary.
I would think about it too is that when I'm also from Park Slope, so when I actually leave this bubble and go to other parts of the country, one thing I hear from people who proudly voted for Trump and still support him is you hear the same thing over and over again, which is that the thing we like about him is he's not going to take anybody's shit. He's not going to take it from anybody. So I'm sorry, I just went PG.
You went Lindsay Stein on us.
I didn't quite go that far. So, but this kind of runs against that narrative a bit, and I wonder if that's going to affect the way that people think about him.
Did he though? I mean, was he played?
I mean,
Putin looked like he knew exactly what he was doing there, didn't he? He's released details of their private meeting,
Right.
which Trump doesn't seem to have briefed anyone else about that private meeting. There was only an interpreter in.
No, but he also doesn't seem to have lived up to that. I'm going to stand up for my country, so the America First thing.
to this
So-
point, I mean, number one, like something we see a lot in our research is the amount of Americans, how much they're paying attention to this. So us who are deeply involved in this and are watching it every single day, I think we sometimes falsely think that incremental moment is going to be big, right? When you go out and actually talk, I mean, I'm from Minnesota. There was a good amount of Trump supporters there. Like, when you actually talk to them, their day-to-day is not revolving around this. I also think back to Trump's tweet this morning. Trump didn't do a bad job. It's the fake news media that is portraying this inaccurately. And if you're gonna look at a Trump supporter and ask, are you gonna trust what the New York Times just wrote or what Trump just tweeted? My guess is they're gonna go with Trump.
That's to his point about just hammering away at those 2 or 3 messages, and that's the only thing
Yeah.
that people hear. Yeah.
Now, last thing on this topic, the tariff issue. And you read all of these stories about how, whether it's farmers in the Midwest or auto workers or things like that, this actually might hit them in the pocketbook a bit. Is that the sort of thing that is more likely to affect, who they vote for in 2018 or in 2020?
So I'd keep an eye on tariffs, particularly because in every election, the number one issue is the economy and how it's affecting them. So I think this issue is going to develop a lot more, but from that perspective and those specific voters, if they are actually feeling like they're losing jobs, losing money, can't keep up, and it's because of that specifically, then I think that will be a major player. But also on top of that, I can't remember who, there was a piece out a few weeks ago where it was either in the Washington Post or the New York Times where they went and talked to some farmers who had been hit by this, right? And some people worked at steel mills and things like that, and they said, well, this isn't great, but I'm sticking by my man. Like, he's done so many other great things. The economy's doing well, et cetera.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Definitely want to watch in the next few months. Frank, let's talk about Papa John's, and an ongoing story. The way that story's moved on this week, I guess, is that some of the agencies have resigned the account.
Yeah, it's really
people
a
like
crazy
Fallon
story.
and Olsen.
Yeah, Fallon is the latest, who was their creative agency that just signed on to work with Papa John's in June. That's a Publicis agency, has stepped back from their work with Papa John's. It's interesting, and I think a lot of this depends on who your employees are and how offended they would be to work with the brand, or how much they wouldn't want to work with the brand.
Yeah, they need to come up with a strategy to take control of this narrative, because they've got their former founder out there spouting, and they've got a narrative out there, and I'm not sure they're doing enough to actually get the new story right. What's the new Papa John's story to change that narrative? We've been chatting a lot, so let's get on to this millennials study. And what were it was all about millennials and brands. So what were the top sort of 3 findings in that?
Yeah, just like back up for a second. I think a lot has been written about millennials that we've read about for a while, but part of it is millennials are getting older now. The big reveal, millennials are from 22 to 37.
So that's good. That's good for me, personally.
Yeah.
Why?
Because then I'm not a millennial.
Oh.
I'm just messing around. Anyway, sorry.
And so what we want to do is kind of, I think there's a lot of stories out there about this is who a millennial is.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you should take a stance as a brand, because they care about these things. And so what we went out and tested, and the biggest takeaways we've saw is that, yes, millennials really do care about values. They care about helping the world. They're very globally conscious. They do prefer experiences over things. Those are all very true. But when it comes to needing their brands to be that global conscious political activist, that's not always as clear.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, partly because I think there's a range of issues that are just still, like we were talking about before, you take a position on that, you're going to alienate half your audience, right? And so the biggest findings from the study were that if you are going to take a political stance, your safest bet is to go in on civil and gay rights. Millennials tend to be a little more liberal, and so if you're going to go out and put your name down on something, you're going to see probably a brand boost from that. The issues of abortion, immigration, gun control are still extremely divisive, especially with gun control being such a big issue now. It's not a clear win yet for these brands.
Have you yet polled the 3 and 4-year-olds to see whether they want to bear arms? Sorry, that's a story for another.
No, but we have, Gen Zers are now coming of age. They're now 18
they're
to
very
21.
different to the millennials.
They're going to be a whole different.
Yeah, it's true. That is worth checking that poll out, and also in the context of your poll that's coming out in a couple of weeks about brands taking a stand, because the accepted wisdom, I think, in our world, Frank, is that companies are expected to take a stand now, and
much more
especially
so.
with the
Much
younger
more
audience.
so than
So
they used to be.
again, what you're saying is that the data doesn't, there are more layers to it than that.
What millennials said that they want from brands is the number one things are good quality given the price. And the biggest way to lose a millennial is bad customer service.
Right.
So if you have those 2 things and you're focused on those 2 things, you're more likely going to win over millennials than taking a stand on,
Yeah,
the gun
in
debate
that
or
way, they're
things
probably
like
not that much different to anyone else,
Right.
are they?
The other big finding that we had was we have the top 25 brands, and they're among millennials, and the top 5 are all tech brands. And I think there's a lot of this talk right now about the tech backlash.
Yeah.
But for what we're seeing in our data is it's just not bearing out in a way that you would think. I mean, partly because this generation grew up with these brands. They grew up with YouTube. They grew up with Google. They grew up with Netflix. It's an integral part of their life. And because of privacy and security concerns, they're not as worried about it.
They're not giving their iPhones up and their Instagram and their etc. Yeah, interesting stuff. Well worth checking out. Frank, quickly, Q2 holding company results. It's Publicis and Omnicom this week. What are the trends showing?
They're bad. So Omnicom.
Not so bad for Omnicom, was it?
Well, Omnicom's PR. I'm sorry, I'm really.
You're rustling in papers.
The papers this week.
I thought you were a millennial doing it all on your phone.
Yes, not today. Omnicom's PR revenue was up 2.7%. That's up against the second quarter of 2017, in which revenue was actually down 0.3%. So it was not a bad quarter for Omnicom's PR firms. Now, if you were to look at the surface information about Omnicom as a whole, revenue's up 2% to $3.9 billion. In the second quarter, net income's up almost 11%. And so you would immediately think, well, that's not too bad. That's not a bad quarter. But if you look at their biggest market, which is North America, revenue's down 0.9% to $2.1 billion. And that's why I think you saw the stock drop the way it did right after the day after the Omnicom release.
That was Omnicom or Publicis, sorry.
That's Omnicom.
Yeah.
Now, this morning was, Thursday morning, was Publicis' second quarter revenue, and it's really the first bad quarter under new CEO Artur Sadoun. And they had
Which you can tell from the picture that accompanies the story.
Yes, here, so our viewers can see at home.
No use for the podcast.
It's on PRWeek.
It does look stunned. So they saw a 2.1% fall in organic growth in the second quarter, which really surprised a lot of analysts who thought there was going to be growth of more than 1%. So healthcare was, and healthcare in North America, was blamed for a lot of it. So really a surprise bad quarter for
we
Publicis
can't
and
really
Future.
divine too much about PR because they don't split the numbers out, and they're kind of different in terms of holding companies in PR because their revenues split equally, a third in Europe and Asia and the US, whereas the others are much more predominantly in North America. But not great news for Publicis.
No. So, and with the Publicis earnings this morning, I think it's important to note that it went beyond the stock drop just for Publicis. It really weighed on Interpublic. It weighed on WPP. And a lot of people are taking the Omnicom results and the Publicis results as a sign that there are more questions about this kind of company model. So this is something to watch. IPG is next week. WPP is after that, so we'll see how those two do.
Yeah, no, for sure. The holding company model is definitely evolving and having to evolve. The whole Sorrel conversations brought that into the spotlight, and it will be interesting to see. So, thank you for that. Jeff, pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks
Thanks
so much
for
for
joining
having
us. Lots of insights there. And, look forward to seeing that survey in a couple of weeks. Don't forget our PR Week conference. It's in Chicago on October the 18th. Great program coming together on that, and a lot of buzz about the event, so do make sure you join us for that. But that's all we got time for. We'll see you next time on the PR Week.